alcohol, exercise, sugar, sex, cigarettes, and coffee. What do all of these things have in common? Well, for some of you, I might have just read a little bit of a shopping list of things worth living for. For others of you, your relationship with any of these can teeter or spill over into the edges of addiction. And for you, this will no doubt be an interesting conversation. Those familiar with traditional addiction treatment will be aware of what's called the 12-step model of recovery, and indeed the idea of addiction as a disease, and as one that you're powerless over. And the story there, and what's been helpful for many people in their quest for recovery from addiction, is the idea of turning one's life over to a power greater than oneself and abstaining completely from the substance of addiction. Others, however, criticise that model for being too passive and too disempowering. And there's a counter notion gathering popularity in addiction treatment circles at the moment that really states that thinking of it as a disease doesn't work for many people. What we do know is addiction's a slippery beast, one that no one has the entire answer to, but we'll broaden the conversation today and ask about a different type of recovery. It's called the SMART model of recovery. And joining me now is Josette Freeman, who's the National Program Director of SMART's SMART Recovery. Welcome to Afternoons.
Thank you. Thanks, Claire.
That's a pleasure. Look, Josette, we'll just get right into it. How useful has the concept of addiction as a disease been to those who need to recover?
Well, Smart Recovery doesn't use the disease model full stop, and the reason being is that often when people, well, number one, it sort of disempowers people, that they feel that they do have a disease and they have no control over it and this is their lot in life, whereas Smart Recovery views it more as maladaptive behaviours. So it's how people cope with what's going on in their lives, and the way that they have coped has obviously not been very helpful, like using drugs or alcohol or food or gambling, whatever it is.
Josette, could you explain to us the difference between something obvious, like a drug or alcohol addiction, and something less obvious, a process addiction?
Well, they're all the same. It's just the severity of some of the side effects or the consequences are worse. But, for example, in a Smart Recovery group, we will have someone that overdrinks, overeats, overspends in the pokie machines, overdoes everything and has become problematic. So the focus is on the behaviour, not on the addiction, if you like, because that's just the way people cope.
So rather than identifying as an addict, you encourage people to identify their behaviour as maladaptive, but them themselves not as. Okay. There's a lot to be...
the other thing is that we don't use labels. So we don't call someone an alcoholic because I think there's still very much a stigma around that, and people view an alcoholic as just one big drinking mess, if you like, which is not the case at all. Someone might have a severe drinking problem, but they might also be a very kind person or a good worker, or it's not their entire being. It's part of them that has the problem that they need to work on.
Josette, if addiction isn't a disease, where do the genetics come in? So we hear many stories of alcoholism runs in families or addiction runs in families. What do we know about the relationship between addiction and genetics, and does Smart Recovery actually factor that in, or have an ideology or a theory around it?
Well, because we're not scientific, I can't really comment on that. What I can comment on is that even if it is genetic, you still have to manage it. So Smart Recovery teaches people skills on how to manage whatever is going on in their life. And if something's not working for them, then they need to make changes around that. So we're giving them a toolbox of things to go out and use, practical strategies on how not to drink or not to gamble or not to overeat or whatever it is that's causing them the problem in their life.
Josette Freeman, National Director, National Program Coordinator of Smart Recovery. Josette, you said that SMART is not a scientific, you don't have scientific research as
Well,
a
we
basis
haven't.
of
Yes, we do. We're based. What I meant by that was that we're not scientists working in smart recovery as such, but the
basis
therapy is cognitive behavioural therapy, which
Okay.
is evidence-based therapy. And so our tools and techniques are based on cognitive behavioural therapy.
Okay, so CBT, cognitive being
Yes.
the way we think, behaviour being the things that we do, and therapy, So I guess you're saying that the smart recovery approach is to take the way people think and try and give them new thoughts that will help them recover from addiction. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's looking at what is triggering them or like what happened, and then what they think or believe around that. So if someone ignores you, you get all upset, and then if your way of coping is to drink, you'll go and drink. But if you view that differently, for example, the person hasn't spoken to me because they're very busy and they're distracted and that sort of thing, and I wasn't quite on their radar, that means that you're not really going to get that upset about it, and then it's less likely that you will drink or drink as much as what you normally would. So it's getting people to be more self-aware of what's going on with their thoughts and their feelings, because those two things lead to the consequences.
Okay, so the concept is feelings are not random things. Urges to overeat, engage in activities that are addictive or not good for us are not a random disease. You're saying that they're based in the things that we thought and that triggering a feeling. So
that's right.
In a way, that's a kind of a bit of a turnaround on the way much addiction is treated these days. But I guess if we can just bring it back again to basics, I first heard about this idea of, addiction is not a disease when Mark Lewis and Johann Hari came to Australia to give a talk at the Festival of Dangerous Ideas. And I guess, with that in mind, this is incredibly complex for human beings, and I suspect that as a friend of mine said to me, there's a constellation of different ways that people can deal with addiction. But for many people, the idea of having a disease that they can't recover from doesn't seem to work for them. And Mark Lewis, the author of a book, I think the book is called The Biology of Disease, Why Addiction is Not a Disease.
Yes.
He refers to a study called Rat Park. Now, are you aware of this study?
Yes, I am. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So could you we'll just explain it a little. So the idea of Rat Park was this. An experiment was done by a group of scientists where animals, rats, were put in an environment together where there was nothing for them to do. The only option that they had was to take I think it was cocaine-laced water.
Cocaine,
yes.
yes.
Okay. And then another group of animals were given basically a paradise park for rats. And what they found was that those animals who were given more access to social connectivity, to activities that they enjoyed, to alternative sources of food and water, didn't engage in the addictive behaviour. So what does this tell us about addiction?
Well, again, it's, it almost gets back to the coping mechanism, but part of recovery, a very big part of recovery is being connected again. And being connected back into the community, family, friends, and giving something back as well. So these are really important things, because when people get isolated, they get very depressed and anxious and suffer social anxiety. So their friend, for example, becomes the bottle. That's their social connection. So it's getting people to see that there's more out there. And to get people to find meaning in their lives. And I think that's what goes by the wayside when people are really in their very active stage of addiction.
So SMART, from what I understand, stands for self-management and recovery training. One of the things that many people who are in the experience of addiction say is useful is getting together with a group of other people who understand what addiction is and what it is they're going through. And that's what many of the 12-step treatment programs that are now adopted by hospitals and so on do offer, and also in the community. what does SMART? I understand SMART also have meetings. Do you have to go to meetings for the rest of your life? Is that the same thing?
No. How SMART Recovery works is that, well, number one, it's for all addictions and can all be in the same room. So it's not just one for alcohol or one for cannabis or narcotics, whatever, because we focus on the behaviour. And the behaviours are all the same, the underlying issues, even though it's not a therapy or counselling group. But everyone in that room either suffers from depression, anxiety, loneliness, boredom, anger, any of those things that lead them to whatever they're going to partake in. Okay. So there is definitely the group process of people supporting each other, but you want to have a group that's more than just like a chat fest. Got it.
Josette Freeman, the National Program Coordinator of Smart Recovery. I'm going to give a website where people can find out more, Josette. That's smartrecoveryaustralia.com.au. Thank you so much for joining us on Afternoons.